Salmon P. Chase was an Ohio lawyer and statesman who became one of the most influential figures in 19th-century American politics. Salmon Portland Chase, the 6th Chief Justice of the United States, was born in Cornish, New Hampshire on January 13, 1808. He came from a family of modest means. Chase had an imposing physical presence and a commanding personality. His early life was marked by tragedy and hardship. He was homeschooled and attended local academies until his father's death when Chase was just 9 years old. The young boy was sent to live with his uncle, Philander Chase, an Episcopal bishop in Ohio. Under his uncle's strict tutelage, Chase received a classical education. He attended Cincinnati College briefly before enrolling at Dartmouth College in 1824. Chase graduated from Dartmouth in 1826 and then moved to Washington, D.C. to study law while supporting himself as a school teacher. Salmon Chase was admitted to the bar in 1829 and established his legal practice in Cincinnati, Ohio. Within a few years he had built a successful law practice and was gaining recognition in legal circles. In 1834, Chase married Catherine Jane Garnes, but tragedy struck when she died in 1835, just months after their wedding. Chase remarried in 1839 to Eliza Ann Smith, but she too died in 1845. Chase would marry once more in 1846 to Sarah Bell Ludlow, who died in 1852. These personal tragedies deeply affected Chase throughout his life, leaving him to raise his daughters alone. Despite these losses, Chase threw himself into his legal work and political activism. Chase became deeply involved in the anti-slavery movement in the 1830s. He defended fugitive slaves in court without charging fees, earning him the nickname Attorney General for runaway Negroes. Chase believed slavery was morally wrong and unconstitutional. He argued that the Constitution did not protect slavery in federal territories and that the federal government had the power and duty to restrict its expansion. His legal arguments in defense of fugitive slaves and abolitionists made him famous throughout the North. Chase was not initially a radical abolitionist like William Lloyd Garrison, who demanded immediate emancipation. He was more moderate, believing in gradual emancipation and colonization schemes. But over time, Chase's views evolved and he became more committed to ending slavery wherever it existed. In 1841, Chase helped establish the Liberty Party, a third party dedicated to anti-slavery principles. The Liberty Party was the first political party in America to make opposition to slavery its central platform. Chase drafted the party's platform and became one of its leading voices. The Liberty Party never achieved major electoral success, but it helped bring anti-slavery politics into the mainstream. Chase understood that for the anti-slavery movement to succeed, it needed to work within the existing political system. He was a pragmatic politician who knew how to build coalitions and compromise when necessary. In 1849, Chase was elected to the United States Senate from Ohio as a Free Soil Democrat. The Free Soil Party opposed the expansion of slavery into the Western territories. Chase aligned himself with this movement, believing that containing slavery geographically would eventually lead to its extinction. As a senator, Chase was an outspoken critic of the Compromise of 1850, which he believed made too many concessions to slaveholding interests. He particularly opposed the Fugitive Slave Act, which required citizens to assist in capturing escaped slaves. Chase argued that this law violated the Constitution and individual liberty. He became one of the leading anti-slavery voices in the Senate. During his Senate term, Chase worked tirelessly to build a new political coalition that could effectively oppose slavery's expansion. He corresponded with politicians across the North, urging them to unite against the slave power. Chase was instrumental in the formation of the Republican Party in the mid-1850s. The Republican Party brought together former Whigs, Free Soilers, and anti-slavery Democrats under one banner. Their platform was straightforward: no expansion of slavery into the territories. Chase helped draft the Republican Party's principles and strategy. He saw the Republican Party as the vehicle through which anti-slavery politics could finally achieve national power. In 1855, Chase was elected governor of Ohio, serving 2 terms until 1860. As governor, Chase worked to improve public education, reform the state's criminal justice system, and promote economic development. He also used his position to advance anti-slavery causes. Chase refused to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act in Ohio, arguing that state officials had no obligation to assist in the capture of escaped slaves. This stance made him extremely popular among anti-slavery voters but also created tensions with the federal government. Chase believed that states had the right to resist federal laws they deemed unconstitutional or immoral. Chase harbored presidential ambitions throughout the 1850s. He sought the Republican nomination in 1856 but lost to John C. Fremont. Chase tried again in 1860, believing he was the natural choice to lead the Republican Party. He had been fighting slavery longer than most Republicans and had the credentials and experience for the presidency. But Chase faced strong competition from William Seward of New York and Abraham Lincoln of Illinois. At the Republican National Convention in Chicago, Chase's support collapsed after the first ballot. Lincoln emerged as a compromise candidate who could unite the party's various factions. Chase was bitterly disappointed by his defeat. Despite his disappointment, Chase campaigned vigorously for Lincoln in the 1860 election. After Lincoln's victory, the president-elect offered Chase the position of Secretary of the Treasury. Chase accepted, seeing it as an opportunity to influence policy and perhaps position himself for a future presidential run. As Treasury Secretary, Chase faced the enormous challenge of financing the Civil War. The federal government needed unprecedented amounts of money to field armies and prosecute the war against the Confederacy. Chase had to develop new systems of taxation and borrowing to fund the war effort. Chase implemented several revolutionary financial policies during the Civil War. He established the first national banking system, creating a uniform national currency backed by government bonds. Before the war, hundreds of different banks issued their own paper money, creating chaos in the financial system. Chase's national banking system brought order and stability to American finance. He also introduced the first federal income tax to help pay for the war. Chase oversaw the printing of paper money known as greenbacks, which were not backed by gold or silver but by the government's promise to pay. These greenbacks helped finance the Union war effort but also caused inflation. Chase was more than just Treasury Secretary. He constantly involved himself in military strategy, cabinet politics, and policy debates. He was ambitious and often clashed with other cabinet members, particularly Secretary of State William Seward. Chase believed he could do a better job as president than Lincoln. He criticized Lincoln's policies privately and sometimes publicly. Chase thought Lincoln was too slow to embrace emancipation and too willing to compromise with border state slaveholders. Chase pushed Lincoln to make the abolition of slavery a war aim from the beginning. In 1862, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all slaves in rebel states would be free as of January 1, 1863. Chase had been urging Lincoln to take this step for months. While Chase supported the proclamation, he thought it didn't go far enough. He wanted immediate emancipation in all states, including the border states that remained loyal to the Union. Chase believed that ending slavery completely was both a moral imperative and a military necessity. Freed slaves could join the Union Army and help defeat the Confederacy. Chase's relationship with Lincoln was complicated and often tense. Chase repeatedly offered his resignation over various disputes, expecting Lincoln to refuse and beg him to stay. Lincoln usually did refuse, recognizing Chase's abilities and the difficulty of replacing him. But Chase also repeatedly undermined Lincoln, encouraging other Republicans to challenge the president's leadership. In 1864, Chase allowed his supporters to launch another presidential campaign against Lincoln. The Chase movement quickly collapsed when it became clear that Lincoln retained strong support within the Republican Party. Chase was humiliated by his failed challenge. In June 1864, Chase offered his resignation once again during a dispute over a patronage appointment. This time, Lincoln surprised everyone by accepting it. Chase had finally pushed too far. Lincoln had grown tired of Chase's constant scheming and disloyalty. For several months, Chase was out of government, though he continued to support the Union cause and campaigned for Lincoln's re-election. Despite their difficult relationship, Lincoln recognized Chase's talents and contributions to the war effort. In October 1864, Chief Justice Roger Taney died. Taney had served on the Supreme Court since 1836 and was infamous for writing the Dred Scott decision, which declared that African Americans could not be citizens and that Congress had no power to prohibit slavery in the territories. Lincoln needed to appoint a new Chief Justice who would support the government's war measures and the legal changes brought about by emancipation. After considering several candidates, Lincoln appointed Salmon Chase as Chief Justice in December 1864. It was a magnanimous gesture toward a political rival. Chase was confirmed by the Senate and took his seat on the Supreme Court. As Chief Justice, Chase presided over a court that had to address the legal consequences of the Civil War and Reconstruction. The court heard cases involving the constitutionality of wartime measures, the rights of freed slaves, and the relationship between the federal government and the states. Chase generally supported a broad interpretation of federal power and the rights of African Americans. He believed the Constitution should be interpreted as a living document that could adapt to changing circumstances. One of the most important cases Chase presided over was Texas versus White in 1869. The case involved the question of whether Texas had legally seceded from the Union during the Civil War. Chase wrote the majority opinion, declaring that secession was unconstitutional and that the Union was perpetual and indissoluble. States could not unilaterally leave the Union. This decision established an important precedent about the nature of the American federal system. Chase argued that the Constitution created an indestructible union of indestructible states. In 1868, Chase presided over the impeachment trial of President Andrew Johnson. Johnson, who had become president after Lincoln's assassination, clashed repeatedly with congressional Republicans over Reconstruction policy. The House of Representatives impeached Johnson, and the Senate held a trial to determine whether to remove him from office. As Chief Justice, Chase was required to preside over the Senate during the trial. Chase conducted the proceedings with fairness and dignity, insisting on proper legal procedures. He angered some radical Republicans by refusing to let the trial become a purely political exercise. The Senate ultimately acquitted Johnson by a single vote. Chase never gave up his presidential ambitions, even while serving as Chief Justice. In 1868, he sought the Democratic Party's presidential nomination, a remarkable move for a man who had spent decades fighting slavery and had helped found the Republican Party. Chase believed he could unite the country and implement a moderate Reconstruction policy. He thought both parties had become too extreme and that the nation needed his steady leadership. But the Democrats nominated Horatio Seymour instead, and Chase's presidential dreams were finally dashed. Many people criticized Chase for seeking the presidency while serving as Chief Justice, seeing it as inappropriate and undignified. Chase continued to serve as Chief Justice until his death. He worked to strengthen the Supreme Court as an independent branch of government. Chase believed the court should be a check on both the executive and legislative branches. He expanded the court's role in protecting individual rights and limiting government power when it overstepped constitutional bounds. Chase was not always consistent in his judicial philosophy, sometimes supporting federal power and sometimes limiting it depending on the circumstances. His legacy on the court is mixed, but he helped guide the nation through the difficult legal questions raised by the Civil War and Reconstruction. Throughout his life, Chase was driven by ambition and principle in equal measure. He genuinely believed in the cause of human freedom and worked tirelessly to end slavery. But he also craved recognition and power, sometimes to the detriment of his relationships and reputation. Chase was brilliant, hardworking, and dedicated, but also vain, calculating, and disloyal. His contemporaries recognized his abilities but often distrusted his motives. Lincoln once said that Chase had the presidential fever so badly that it had affected his brain. Yet Lincoln also acknowledged that Chase was indispensable to the Union war effort. Chase's personal life remained marked by tragedy even in his later years. He outlived 3 wives and several of his children. His daughter Kate Chase Sprague was a prominent Washington socialite who had helped manage her father's political career. Kate was ambitious for her father and shared his presidential dreams. After marrying Senator William Sprague, Kate's own life became troubled by financial problems and marital difficulties. Chase found solace in his work and his remaining family, but the losses he endured left him a somewhat lonely and melancholic figure. On May 7, 1873, Salmon P. Chase died in New York City after suffering a stroke. He was 65 years old. Chase had lived through one of the most tumultuous periods in American history and had played a central role in many of the era's defining events. He had helped build the anti-slavery movement, create the Republican Party, finance the Civil War, and reshape the American legal system. His contributions to ending slavery and preserving the Union were immense. Chase was buried in Oak Hill Cemetery in Washington, D.C., though his remains were later moved to Spring Grove Cemetery in Cincinnati. Chase's legacy is complicated. He was never as beloved as Lincoln or as celebrated as other Civil War leaders. His ambition and political scheming made him difficult to admire unreservedly. But his commitment to ending slavery was genuine and long-standing. Chase fought against slavery when it was politically unpopular and personally costly to do so. He used his legal skills to defend the defenseless and his political talents to build movements that changed the nation. Chase understood that ending slavery required working within the political system, building coalitions, and making strategic compromises. He was a pragmatic idealist who knew that moral principles had to be translated into practical politics to achieve real change. As Treasury Secretary, Chase's innovations transformed American finance. The national banking system he created lasted for decades and helped build a modern industrial economy. His financial policies during the Civil War were controversial but ultimately successful in funding the Union war effort. Without Chase's ability to raise money through taxes, bonds, and paper currency, the Union might not have been able to field the armies necessary to defeat the Confederacy. Chase's face appeared on various pieces of currency over the years, a fitting tribute to the man who revolutionized American finance. As Chief Justice, Chase helped establish important precedents about the nature of the Union and federal power. His decision in Texas versus White settled the question of secession definitively. Chase's court also began the long process of defining the legal meaning of the post-Civil War constitutional amendments that abolished slavery and guaranteed equal protection under law. Though the court would later retreat from protecting African American rights during the era of Jim Crow, Chase at least tried to give meaningful effect to the promises of Reconstruction. Salmon P. Chase was a man of contradictions. He was deeply religious yet politically calculating. He was principled yet ambitious. He fought for the rights of African Americans yet sometimes held paternalistic views about their capabilities. He was loyal to causes but disloyal to individuals. Chase represented both the best and worst of 19th-century American politics. He showed how moral conviction could drive political change, but also how personal ambition could corrupt noble purposes. In the end, Chase's contributions to ending slavery and preserving the Union outweigh his personal failings. He was never president, the position he so desperately wanted, but he shaped American history in profound ways nonetheless.